Hey y'all, welcome back to Twin Oaks Family Farm in Southeast Ohio, USA. We are getting ready for meat birds, and this utility trailer that is featured in the screen here is helping us get prepared for our meat birds moving in. We're moving in 225 Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens in just about 2 weeks. So in this video, I want to tell you one of the important things we're doing to get ready for them, and I'll tell you how that trailer is important to us. Hey y'all, Melissa here at Twin Oaks Family Farm. Thanks for joining us, doing some videos on getting ready for raising meat birds. In this case, we're talking specifically about raising Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens for poultry. And we are just doing some videos as we're preparing to move in our own flock of 225 birds. That will be our first flock of production for 2025. As we're doing our tasks to get ready for them, we are trying to make a video with each task to help y'all walk through the process of getting ready for meat birds if you're going to be raising some as well. So I showed you a utility trailer that we have here on the place, and the way that is helping us is we are utilizing that for feed storage. So I don't have a lot to show you today, but that's exactly what I want to talk to you about. Feed for your meat birds in terms of just being prepared, not focusing in on a certain kind of feed, not debating what kind of feed is the best, but just talking about being ready with your feed and the considerations of actually storing your feed in a way that keeps it dry and keeps it ready to feed and helps lessen the attraction to it for rodents around the property. So those are big concerns. So as I mentioned, we're going to move in 225 Cornish Rock Cross meat chicken chicks. We're in Southeast Ohio. We're going to get them from a hatchery in Southwest Ohio. They're actually going to come through the mail, through the Postal Service, and we'll pick them up local. It's February 27th, 2025 now. Our first group for this year moves in on March 12th, 2025. The barn that they go in is behind me. This pickup truck is something that we also use at the end of production when we want to haul live birds to the processor. We simply prefer not to do the processing ourselves. Even at our small scale, to process several hundred birds at a time is a really huge undertaking. So we specialize in starting, growing, and finishing them, and then we contract out to a professional processor to get our meat made from our chickens. One of the things that we do that we want to just share with you in this video is making sure that we have all the feed on hand, on site, that we want for the flock, for all the birds in the flock, for the entire time that we're raising them. So a piece of advice that we would give you if you're going to raise Cornish Rock Cross meat chickens, and this would really actually apply to any kind of production agriculture project, whether it's for commercial sales or whether it's for household use, you need to think ahead about feed and plan on a reliable supply of feed. So with our meat birds, and at the quantity that we're raising them, we're able to pay for and store the amount of feed that we need for an entire production cycle, which with a flock of birds for us is 6 weeks time. 6 weeks to start, grow, and finish them. For example, this first flock we're bringing in, they will hatch. They're scheduled to hatch on March 12th. We have processing already scheduled on April 23rd. So we know we've got like a 6-week span that we need to have feed here for the birds. We could go and get a little bit of feed when we pick the birds up and have that here, and wait till we get down to like 50 pounds of that feed and then go replenish and do that continuously throughout raising them. But we have found when we have the money to pay for it and when we have the storage to accommodate it, our preference is really to go and get all of the feed that we need for producing that flock, so that we can feed them from start to finish from that storage of feed without having to go and buy some more. So with going to just kind of digress to other animals or other purposes. If you have larger livestock for production, agriculture, for producing meat, you may not necessarily be in the same situation as meat chickens or a small animal like meat rabbits, where you maybe can know ahead of time exactly how much feed you'll need and how long you need to go. And you may need obviously more feed for larger animals because they have a much longer production time. But even in those cases, you want to be looking ahead at what you feed, and are you going to be able to continue to get that feed? Are you going to put a system in place to make sure that you don't run out of feed and forget to go to the feed mill or to the feed store and have more feed supply replenished for your animals? Even if you have animals for household production, say backyard chickens for egg production, it's still a great practice to sit down, pencil and paper at a tabletop, figure out, like, let's say a month's time. If it would simplify your life to be able to go to the feed mill or feed store once a month, get everything you need, set up a place to accommodate storing it, then you could sit down, figure out based on how many hens you have, how much feed do you need over a month's time, and you can go to the feed mill or the feed store and get that feed. So even in those situations, it really helps to look at how much feed you need, have it on hand, and do that for a little bit of a time range so that you're kind of on a schedule of replenishing. The way we schedule that with our meat birds is we look at when our flock is coming in, and we aim for, like, anywhere a week to 2 weeks ahead of when our flock is moving in, to have asked our feed store or feed mill to have that feed in stock so that we can go ahead and buy it and bring it home and get it on site here. So and we do apply that to our egg chickens as well. We try to look at how much feed do we need in a month's time for them, and we try to get all that at once for a month. We have a place to store it, and then we're not running out. So that's our recommendation with raising meat birds and the feed, especially if you're raising them for your household. Like, we're going to be raising 225 birds this time. We might be raising 400 the next flock. If we were just raising for our household and just wanted to do that one time a year, we would probably still raise 150 to a couple hundred birds, and we would use the same policy. We would want to get the feed that we need for the entire production time all up front and have it on site. So I can tell you, with meat birds, we use a 22% protein complete feed that we keep them on from start to finish. Now, we do have like a plan B and a plan C for different circumstances. If they're growing almost ahead of schedule, we have a plan B to drop the protein down just a little bit. If they seem to be lagging, we have a plan B to make sure that we continue to supply the feed, and we can add in a little bit extra with another feed stuff if we want to. With meat birds, though, one issue that could get them lagging in feed is if their appetite doesn't increase, and in those cases it's hard to really do anything about that. But if your birds get a good start, chances are their appetite is going to compound 3 or 4 times over production. And ideally, you actually want to get food into your little meat birds within about the first 21, 22 hours. That's really the optimum kind of window of opportunity to get food in them and let their digestive system really, really get a good start. And with meat birds, you also got to keep ambient temperature to their liking throughout production. So we're starting them at like 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and then each week we can lower the ambient temperature around them by 5 degrees Fahrenheit a week at a time until we get them down to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's pretty much where they're going to stay. And we're almost at the end of production then. So with our meat birds, what I want to tell you is that on the feed that we use, 22% complete feed crumble that we use from start to finish, formulated for meat birds, made by Kalmbach, we know from experience that per bird, 10 pounds of feed to start, grow, and finish that bird. So that's like the rubric or the benchmark that we go by on how much food are we going to need for our meat birds. We figure on 10 pounds of feed per bird. So we buy our feed in 50-pound bags. And you can do that differently if you're buying way big quantities of feed. You can buy probably bulk feed in a different packaging. Still though, we kind of buy in bulk somewhat, because like for this flock coming in with 225 birds, we actually purchased 45 bags of their complete feed. And so we're still buying it by the bag, paying a flat price for all 45 bags. And there's about 40 bags on what they call a unit that's a pallet. Okay, so they call the unit a pallet. So 40 bags on the pallet. So, you know, we're kind of more or less buying it by the pallet in 50-pound bags. Now, with our meat birds, then back to the numbers on quantity, I said 10 pounds per bird. So basically, we scale that up to, from one bird, we scale up to 100. And we say then that 100 birds needs 20 50-pound bags of feed here on our production system. So every 100 birds needs another 20 bags of feed. So when we're doing the 225, definitely the 200 birds should consume 40 bags, and then we got the 5 extra bags, and for the 5 more birds, or 25 more birds. And if they eat through all that, we do feel confident that we can get more of that, but also we can pace that toward the end of production and make sure that what we purchased is going to be enough feed to get them through production. So as you get into raising them, you can kind of watch that with your feed distribution to the birds. So only a couple other things here I want to share. So when you get your feed, you do need to make sure that you can store it in a way that isn't going to be letting the feed get wet and get affected by the elements of weather. You don't want your feed bags getting wet. You don't want the feed getting soaked wet. So you need to keep it dry. And also you don't want it stored in a way that is accessible to rodents, because just by its very nature of being a feedstuff that is intended to feed to livestock, it is attractive to rodents. So, you know, like even in our building, if we just take pallets in there and offload the pallets and set the pallets down, we're going to attract rats, and they're going to tunnel up through the base material in there, the stone base material that's in the bottom of our building. They're going to tunnel up through that and tunnel up into the bottom of the pallet, and they'll help themselves. It's just like a smorgasbord buffet for them if we just set pallets of feed in the building. So we don't want to do that. We've tried having old freezers, like chest freezers that aren't in use anymore as freezers, and putting feed in there, either dumping it in there or putting bags in there. You can do either. If that will hold all the feed that you need for a flock of birds, or, you know, if you have a couple freezers and that'll hold it, you could do that. We tried that. We're at a scale where we can't put all the feed in those freezers, so it really doesn't work for us. So this time we're using this utility trailer that my husband actually has for his concrete tools, and we can put all the feed in there, at least for this flock, and even for the bigger, the 400 bird flocks, we could fit it all in there. So we're going to store it in there. You could, though, now here's something else you could do. If you're at a scale like we're at or bigger, you actually could buy a grain bin specifically for grain. And if you still had to buy in the 50-pound bags, you could just dump the 50-pound bags into your grain bin, and that would be super storage. You know, you could kind of capitalize some of your infrastructure money for your operation into your grain bin. We're not going to do that, because this is not something that we may necessarily do forever in a commercial operation. So you know, we kind of evaluate based on that as we go year to year, flock to flock during the years. So we are storing what we have this time in the utility trailer, but that's helping us accomplish that, of keeping it from attracting rodents in and keeping it stored where it's going to be dry And then, oh, the other thing, I said, wanted to tell you two things about the feed. The other thing I wanted to tell you, so in the first video we did on this train of thought, getting ready for meat birds, and showed you the baby chick feeders and waters that we're going to use. I mentioned how with meat birds, it's a great rule of thumb to have enough feeders and waters, but let's focus in particularly on feeders. Great rule of thumb to have enough feeders that every bird in your flock could get to a feeder all at the same time if they all decided they want to eat at the same time. I mentioned that. And then I went on to say, now in practice, in reality, is that always going to happen? Probably not. So I want to talk about that. In our situation, our feed system, our production system calls for us feeding round the clock, 24/7, start to finish. So there's always feed down on the barn floor for our meat birds. Therefore, we never create a feeling and perception amongst the birds in the flock of scarcity or of running out of food. There's always food there. So in our situation, most generally, we don't see the birds go into a feeding frenzy, go attack the feeders, and when we're checking the building multiple times throughout the day, as feeders are getting low, we're adding feed, so we're actually trying to never let the feeders go empty. When you first get meat bird chicks, you do need to feed them round the clock 24/7 the first week, regardless of how you're going to continue your feed protocol. A lot of people raising meat birds, a lot of producers will put them on a schedule that coordinates some intensive lighting use, some on-off hours of lighting, and a feeding schedule that could coordinate with daylight hours, nighttime hours. So if you change your birds over to a system of either some complete darkness or a system of withholding feed for, say, 12 hours overnight, you definitely want to go back to that rule of thumb and make sure that you have enough feeder space for every bird in your flock to go to a feeder at exactly the same time. Because here's what happens when you have either a period where you withhold food and it's not available to the birds, or a period where you impose complete darkness and they're not going to feed. Whenever they get feed again, and that could be because it's time to put feed back in the pen, or time to fill the feeders, or it's time to turn the lights on. Whenever they go back to feed, meat birds, they're all going to want to go eat. And so what we found with meat birds is if we use a feeding system where we take some food away for part of the time, or we cut the lights and that causes them to not be up eating part of the time, or they're in a pastured situation where, you know, it's dark overnight and they're not going to eat, then when it comes time that they know they can get to food again, it creates a feeding frenzy, and those birds go absolutely nuts. And if they don't have enough room at the feeders, they're going to be stepping over each other, pushing each other, shoving each other, fighting each other, muscling each other in and out of the feeders. And it's just not, it's not good for them. It's not good for their legs. It's not good for their wings. It's not good for the meat that we're trying to develop on the bird. It's high stress. It's just bad. It's just bad. So if it's okay to use the feed protocol where you want to do like feed on for 12 hours, feed off for 12 hours, a lot of people do that. I'm not going to take issue with that. I'm not going to do it, but I'm not going to take issue with it. But if you do it, take my word for it, you want space at the feeders for every bird to be able to get there because when it's time to eat, they're ready. They're going to the food. So at any rate, so that's what we wanted to tell y'all about feed. Just have it. If you're raising, you know, a flock of meat birds for yourselves, for your household, figure out how much feed you need. If you're using a complete feed, reliably, I can tell you 10 pounds per bird should finish your birds, start grow and finish them. So you can figure out X number of birds times 10 is how many pounds of feed I'm going to need to grow these birds. That'll definitely work on a complete feed that's high enough protein for them, like the 22% protein. And that'll still work even if you start them on 22% protein and say you get 3-4 weeks into it and you for some reason want to slow them down, you could bump them back to 19% protein. But 10 pounds of feed. And I guess I should caveat that also our system is a 6-week production system. So if you're going to go out to 8 weeks or 9 weeks, which I never would with Cornish rock cross meat chickens, but some systems prefer that. If you're going to go out to 8-9 weeks, something like that, it's probably going to take more than 10 pounds per bird, because they're going to be able to consume on average 10 pounds per bird from day 1 to day 42, to the end of week 6. So we wanted y'all to know that you really can do yourselves a big favor if you're raising meat birds, if you're able to pre-purchase all the feed you need to take that flock from start through grow to finish, and get it on site. I was going to say get it paid for, because paid for is what we like. Get it paid for, have it on site, and have it stored in such a way that it's not going to get soaked by rain and that rats aren't going to get into it. And the reason, you know, wrapping up on that, the reason this just helps you is because I know we all think that we're going to get down to like 100 pounds left or 50 pounds left, the 2 bags down or the 1 bag down, and oh, we're going to go right to the feed mill, feed store, and get it. And so many times when you get down to the last bag of feed, it's the most inconvenient time of the week or whenever to go to the feed mill. So we know that we've got the feed here on hand. There's absolutely no chance of running out and it not being convenient to get to resupply the feed, because you really don't want to run out. And then the other thing, and we've only run into this one time in 5 years with meat birds, but if you opt to get a little bit of your feed when you start your meat birds and say to yourself, I'm just going to get some more feed as I need it for them. One time we went back to get feed, and I don't think that they had the feed on hand that we had been feeding, so we had to kind of adjust. We could still stay in the same brand, but we had to adjust what we were wanting to feed. So this way, you know, if you get it all on hand ahead of time, you've got it there, and there's no chance of when you do run low and you go back to the feed mill or feed store to resupply it, there's no chance that you're going to run into, we couldn't get that in on the truck from the feed manufacturer. So that's another reason. That's the main reason that we recommend get your feed ahead of time, have it on site, have it ready to go, and have enough quantity of it that you can take that flock from start to finish, because we don't want to run out, and we don't want to have to switch feeds mid-production program on a flock if we can avoid that at all. So really appreciate you joining us at Twin Oaks Family Farm. Thank you so much. We love to share our experience with y'all about raising meat birds. In particular, we love to encourage y'all to raise and produce some of your own food if you have a season of life that will work for that, and if you have resources to do it with. And if not, please connect with local farmers and producers wherever local is for you. Let's get agriculture back to out of the factories, out of the corporations, back to the land, back to the people, and let's connect with people who are producing the food so that we know where our food is sourced from and we're getting food that is good for us. That's what we want to encourage. So thank you so much, y'all. Have a great day.